Another phone from ZTE and another phone with an under-display camera. ZTE's Axon family of phones, however, has got a little bit complicated. Last year's Axon 20 was the first phone to feature an under-display camera. Then it was followed up by the Axon 30 Pro and the 30 Ultra. However, we didn't actually see an Axon 30, just the plain vanilla name version. That's because it's the next phone with a much improved under-display camera. So weirdly, the last phone in the Axon 30 family to appear is the Axon 30. And it's substantially cheaper than those other two phones. This phone rings in at $500, and that's dollars without me trying to put a price into pounds, because yes, this phone is coming to the US. So the headline feature on the Axon 30 is the under-display camera, and it's pretty much imperceptible? However you say that word. It's that to the eye, unless you really go hunting for it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. Even if I kind of bring it up to the screen here, you can see Stadia running there. And if I can tilt the light around, yep, the camera is actually right at the top of that edge. You just won't really be able to see it. So why all the fuss? Well, this under-display camera kind of puts the competition to shame, whether that's ZTE's old phones or Samsung's Galaxy Fold 3, which also has an under-display camera, which really isn't as good as this one. There's no weird patchy pixelation, and however ZTE has done it, it's really kind of smoothed the effect of having that camera hidden away. According to ZTE, the reason for this is twofold. First of all, pixel density. Compared to last year's Axon 20, the Axon 30 has a 400 pixel per inch chunk of display dedicated to the camera. And then there's the pixel matrix itself, which ZTE has apparently tinkered to make sure it kind of blends in a little bit more smoother with the rest of the screen around it. See it for yourself. I actually have Oppo's Find X3 Pro, which has a microscope camera, and you can actually kind of see the subpixels through this camera alone. So taking a much closer look, you can see that the pixels are a little bit different around the area of the camera, but yet substantially better than the phones we've seen up until now. A hidden camera also perfectly complements this giant screen that this phone has. It's a 6.92-inch AMOLED display. It also features up to 120Hz refresh rates, with even higher rates for touch sensitivity. You can even tinker with that, either leaving it on automatic or putting it into manual to either burn through your battery more, I guess, or conserve energy and go for rates like 60Hz, even if things scroll a little choppier. And while that's great, there are some compromises ZTE have had to make with this phone. First on the chopping block was wireless charging. Love it, hate it, it's not here. You also get no certified protection from dust or water. So that's important to know if you go jogging with your phone or, are in sandstorms. Anyway, this phone might not have enough protection. With a screen that size, of course, the phone itself is pretty big. It has a plastic backing, which is pretty solid, and it has this lovely translucent reflective effect on the back, which is kind of nice to see when you kind of know this is plastic. I'm less enamored, however, with this giant chunky camera module, which is on a lot of phones, but again, it's another thing to scrape, another thing to ding. And yeah, fortunately ZTE do pack in a see-through case with the phone, so that went straight on, and that kind of ameliorates at least part of the problem. More compromises? Well, the processor. This phone has a Snapdragon 870, so it's not really flagship leading power. That said, it is perfectly capable of dealing with everything I've thrown at it so far, whether that's 4K video, gaming, Stadia, and everything else you might be doing with your phone to really make it heat up. Then again, at the same time, ZTE put a far more potent processor in the Axon 30 Ultra. I guess that's why they call it the Ultra. Now, I mentioned at the start that while this phone is coming to the US, it doesn't have quite the range of 5G support you might hope. It is supported by T-Mobile's 5G spectrum, the part it got when it bought Sprint, but that's about it. I mean, obviously I'm based in the UK, so all my 5G tests are about our 5G networks, but when it comes to support for it, yes, you have plenty of 4G LTE love, but if you're thinking about the future and the next few years of using your phone, yeah, the 5G radios, they might be a little lacking. But back to the good news, the phone has a 4200 mAh battery, which is pretty big, and it also features ZTE's fast charge tech, and that means you can probably charge up the entire phone in under an hour. I managed to get to about 50% charge from zero in under 25 minutes. It's pretty impressive and pretty useful. ZTE's Android experience leans mostly towards the stock one, and that's good because this company used to really meddle with Android. They've taken a more hands-off approach here, and that's great. It mostly feels like a Pixel. It feels like that stock Android experience with a few little quirks on top. For example, on the phone, you can shake the phone to activate the flashlight. There's also a new Z Pop widget, which might look familiar to anyone that's owned a Samsung phone. This is a little pop-out bar that can offer 4 different shortcuts to phone functions or app shortcuts. You can also just not enable it whatsoever, and it will stay out of your way. The front-facing camera, technical marvel, but actually it's a pretty terrible selfie camera. While the sensor is 16 megapixel, it kind of bins some of those pixels and manipulates it just to get an image when it's capturing it through that AMOLED display. And the results just look bad. Now don't get me wrong, it takes the best UDC selfies we've seen so far compared to the Fold 3 or last year's Axon 20, but this still isn't good enough. When I look at these selfie pictures, it feels a bit like a time warp. These are the kind of selfie pics we got on low resolution cameras, 5 years ago, 8 years ago with smartphones. This isn't a selfie of a phone from 2021, or at least it shouldn't be. Details are fuzzy and there's always some lens flare or some washed out color whenever there's backlighting or any kind of strong light source around you. The camera does capture enough detail to offer face unlock functionality if you want that, besides fingerprint unlock, and yes, the sensor is built into the display again. Onto the rest of the cameras, and on the back of the ZTE Axon 30 there are no fewer than 4 sensors led by a 64 megapixel Sony sensor. While you'll be mostly taking photos with a lot of these pixels fused together for better performance in low light and less noise, you are able to take full fat 64 megapixel stills if you so choose to. This is very good if you have a tripod and you want to capture lots of detail all at once. Alongside that, there's an ultra-wide angle 8 megapixel sensor, and then sensors for macro photography, just ignore it, use the main sensor, and then a depth sensor as well. On that main sensor, you get up to 2 times optical zoom, which is par for the course at this price point. When I had lighting on my sides, images came out really well. I actually took the phone along to a family event, and I found a lot of the photos of people came out really nicely. Lots of detail, great skin tone. There is a softness to some shots, probably due to that pixel binning issue, but otherwise this is a really solid mid-range camera phone. There's a night mode, of course, but generally you can use the standard center and the standard shooting mode to get pretty decent photos even in low light. But most of the time you can probably just lean on the typical camera mode without having to go into night mode. There's a pretty heavy-handed AI mode as well, and I'd advise you to take photos both with it on and with it off, because a lot of the time I didn't really like how the AI mode was processing my photos. Obviously your mileage may vary, but it's worth bearing in mind that it can be a little bit aggressive. Video capture is where the Axon 30 starts to let itself down. Video modes on smartphones these days, they've all kind of solidified around the same usual modes. However, the phone does offer the ability to capture from 2 sensors at once, and then you can edit together 2 different video perspectives. The phone can handle up to 4K at 60 frames per second, but the autofocus is so bad most of the time, you might not want to. If you've got a stable subject and the light, yet again, is on your side, you'll get some decent footage. But lower that lighting or try to capture a toddler running across the room and you're going to struggle. In night shooting, it's even worse, and yeah, again, you're not going to use any video you capture when lighting is bad with the Axon 30. The focus just can barely lock onto anything. With the Axon 30, ZTE has proven it can truly hide its under-display camera, but that doesn't mean it should have. Image quality from the secretive selfie camera really isn't good enough, even if it is a technical marvel. Fortunately, the cameras on the other side of the phone are pretty good. But aside from that, the Axon 30 has a gorgeous huge screen, a pretty capable camera, and was able to deal with pretty much everything I threw at it. The lack of wider 5G support on this phone is another frustration, but there's still a lot of phone here for $500. The only problem for ZTE is the amount of competition in this mid-range phone area. Even Google's own Pixel 5a has appeared on the scene at $449, and that's cheaper than the Axon 30. Between the two, the decision might boil down to great selfies or great screen. As always, hit subscribe for even more phone reviews and stay tuned to Engadget.com for all the rest big tech news. Thanks for watching.